welcome to the October edition of the Patch Tuesday Support Group, a safe place to cry into our beverages of choice. As always, I'm joined by, I guess not always, because we had a much better Jordan last month, but we are rejoined by Jordan. Womp womp. I'm just saying, Carrie was better. And also,
all right, you see how it is. Time is a soup for you, apparently.
Time is a soup. Exactly.
2 months ago, sir.
Not a fondue?
What?
Not a fondue? Is a
right
soup?
Over my, whoosh, whoosh. No, still right over my head. And Jake providing whatever he just provided there. Deep cuts. Is that a deep cut? I don't know what's a deep cut, but
moderation, apparently.
Go for the ankles, Brian.
Moderation. So, as always, Jordan's going to lead us off with telling us about some of the super fun, happy security CVEs that he's found.
Happy
this
is a word
this month.
that you could use.
Yes, absolutely. And then I got a bunch of news. We are not joined by a special guest, mostly because we were lazy and traveling. But there's a real fun thing to talk about at the end. So we'll anyone who is super excited about the deprecation of WSUS, we'll have a hot second at the end to have the feels for that. So with that, Jordan, take it over. Take it on, sir.
All right, let's go ahead and jump into the wonderful joys of patches for this month. Starting off first with Microsoft. In this wonderful, joyous occasion, Microsoft has released fixes, fixes, I guess, for 121 CVEs. Of those CVEs, 3 of which were marked critical, 114 were marked important, 1 was marked moderate, and 3 received a wonderful score of not applicable. The breakdown of those joyous resolutions is denial of service. There were 26 of them. There were 28 occasions by which you could elevate privilege, 6 formats in which you could do information disclosure, 43 of them involving remote code execution, 7 of them security feature bypass, 7 spoofing, and 1 tampering. Moving on into the bucket into particular patches of note, I want to go ahead and start out with KB5044343. Again, that is KB5044343 or CVE 2024-38124. Everybody, I'm going to go ahead and post the CVE here in chat just for you. And everybody who is super attached to your naming conventions, this is the very first time that I've ever seen Microsoft basically say like, hey, predictable naming conventions that are cool, you should just stop doing those. The actual mitigation suggested here is avoid using predictable naming conventions for domain controllers. Why? Because using an unauthenticated method in server 2012, R2, apparently you can manage to reserve the next name for an Active Directory machine in place. And when that machine name gets promoted or should get promoted out through it, congratulations, you now own a domain controller. So there's some interesting fixes that have gone out in order to try and fix that. Some of the mitigations there, above and beyond applying the patch, are kind of interesting to go through and read. But if you are still using on-prem infrastructure, definitely worth taking a look at and getting an idea for, especially if you do actually use naming conventions, seeing as hopefully most everybody is to some degree using a naming convention-ish. In another particular fun, joyous patch of note, or I really should say CVE of note, not so much patch of note, is CVE 2024-6197. Again, that is CVE 2024-6197. This happens to deal with everybody's favorite, download tool once again, curl. More specifically, it has to do with libcurl. So the reason why this one in particular is interesting is there's necessarily a true patch per se associated to this, because it's not just curl, it's not curl.exe that's the problem here in Windows. It's the actual underlying library that gets used inside of curl. We've talked a little bit before about things where we have different, supply chain components and attacks here. Brian, if you're trying to talk and participate, nobody can hear you.
Stupid things. Why do we use Zoom? We're talking about curl again?
Again, we are talking about curl again. Yes, I kid you not. We are talking about curl again. We have once again, and not just, not curl.exe, but the actual component module libraries for it, libcurl. Yeah, the assembly for it, libcurl, one of the assembly components for it now, has a compromise in it. I believe it was like 9 on the scorecard for it. There's not really a patch for it. Like, it's not great. I think it was 9. I'll have to go back and look and double check. I've got the article for it here. Let's see if they even assigned a score to it yet. Let's see. It looks like a 9. Yeah, 3.1, 9.0, 7.8, depending on your scoring mechanism for it. Remediation level, official fix, Oh, sorry, wait, this is the wrong CVE. My bad. Hang on. Let me click the right CVE. Yeah, 2024-6197. Let's see. Yeah, 8.8 for it. There is supposedly a official fix for it to some degree for some things, but not for everything. But yeah, again, it is the actual like subcomponent for it inside of it, and it's embedded in all kinds of things all over the place. So look forward to lots of patches that have to do with in the basically a client connected to a malicious server and can download things as a result of it in ways that it shouldn't actually do. It's super awesome. And then let's go ahead and take a look at one more patch. I think somebody actually specifically asked about this earlier, which is, let me make sure that I'm reading the correct patch number this time for it. KB 291-66583. The config manager fix for CVE 2024-43468. There's both a lot and a little to say about this. I don't know if anybody has kind of followed along on this. I know there's a lot of questions about like, hey, have you tested this or have you tested that? When it first came out, because this is both new and not new. It looks new, but it's actually been on release, I think, twice now, basically. The first time around, people installed it. It didn't go so great for a lot of people. There was a lot of rollback that then happened for it, and then they re-released it. It did get a wonderful score of a 9.8, and nobody's talking about the details of why. Specifically, though, we can kind of guess a little bit based on some of the things that stopped working, and based on some of the commentary of things for that it addresses, which is specifically communication between the management point and the SQL database. What the exact component it was, or what the exact attempted injection method for it is that you can actually manage to send code through the management point into SQL or via the management point to SQL in some way, shape, or form to then cause something to happen. I haven't seen anything anywhere come forward on. It does sound like, based on the current chatter, though, that the most recent version of it is relatively successful and has not been having the issues that it had 2 weeks ago. And the overwhelming majority response that I've seen so far is you should go install this and you should test this and you should roll this out as soon as possible.
Yeah, so to give some timeline to that, because I also have this kind of in my news section, but I'll just preempt that now. Like, so the timeline here is for anyone who wasn't following along. It was released on September 4th. Was literally pulled the very day later.
Day of.
And the problem that it was experiencing is that it was creating and orphaning so many connections to SQL that would basically exhaust the ports. I don't want to say ports. It's exhaust the number of concurrent SQL connections you could have to SQL, and thus nothing could connect to SQL for things like, I don't know, the SMS provider. That's the thing that backs the console.
Entirety of config manager and console and how it works. Yeah,
right. And my boss happens to be David James, so we talked very briefly about this, and he's like, yeah, it's kind of the way some of the architecture works. It kind of consistently does that. Like, there's these connections that kind of get lost and orphaned, and there's a whole process for every once in a while going through and cleaning them up and killing anything. But clearly, what they did is triggered something that took an existing problem and exacerbated it. Yeah, made it a lot worse to where it was clearly in an infinite loop of some kind, just creating connections and then YOLOing out.
The general bits from what I've kind of gathered from looking at a bunch of different things is it had something to do with Location Manager. There was something to do with the update with Location Manager for like how location services or something was going on with it, for stuff like that on the MP would just get exhausted, because a lot of people figured out early on that like, hey, here's this is just like smashing. Somebody commented about CPU, like it was smashing CPU and things like that, and rollback of that file happened to fix it, that file specifically. So that there's some degree of like some guessing for it. But there's no real known. But the big thing about it is a 9.8. Being able to arbitrarily run commands and software on your config manager server is probably bad. Nobody knows the exact details of it other than it's a SQL injection attack that eventually typically the end result of SQL injection for that is managing to rebuild or cause something to happen at the other end as the result of it. So yeah, go test, go patch, probably a good idea to start to work down through.
Yeah, I people are asking, I mean, obviously we're seeing in the chat, people have installed it on Reddit. I know I was kind of traveling when they re-released it, but I haven't seen any major mega threads of holy shit, please do not install this, it's still broken. So I'm going to take that as good news, but also like, trust but verify. But there's not, I say that there's not a lot of way to verify other than just rolling it out.
YOLO?
Yeah, like there really is. I mean, if you have a test environment, great, but you probably don't. So sorry about it.
You're talking about production, Brian.
Yeah, exactly.
You happen to also have production. Which brings us around to third-party updates. So this month, coming from the wonderful world of Patch My PC, we released a grand total of about 3,305. Well, that's a lot of updates. For those, the severity of those particular patches that address things, there were 69 critical ones, 479 important ones, 2,422 moderate, 9 lows, and 326 that just updated something. In the world of browser wars, Google Chrome came out with 15 patches in 30 days. That's a patch every other day. That's a lot. Firefox had its typical 10. Edge, because it's following the Chromium model, also had 15. And Opera weighing in at 9. Nothing tremendously huge and massive that I had of note in some of the third-party stuff this month. There were a couple of little things in Firefox that were kind of interesting, in particular with Android phones more than anything else. There was actually more mobile things than anything else along the way for majorly super bad negative fixes. Everything else was pretty much typical business as usual for most of the patches that came out. With that, over to you, Mr. Bryan.
So the first thing on my list, let's talk about some super happy, fun security stuff. This one was super interesting. We're all, I'm sure, know and love Captchas, and it's like, okay, yep, sure, this makes sense.
Yeah, no.
No, it
doesn't.
Shit. This is amazing. So to be clear, you click "I'm not a robot," and it prompts up this little verification step. So hey, go ahead and verify who you are. Push Windows R, Control V, and enter. And of course, what that button does is put a whole bunch of an encoded PowerShell command. So that's super fun. Just to something to be aware of and watch out for.
It's better than buying, Google Play gift cards, I'd say.
I too like to click on Captchas that end in .html. That run on AmazonOz.com. That just sounds.
Well, I'm
really
going to presume they're able to hide it better, but this is
that's amazing.
Yeah,
I'm sure it works for plenty of people.
That's what I'm saying. I mean, oh shit, that's totally a thing people that I know will do. So yeah, that's fun. Over the last few months, we've continually kind of talked about this whole are you hiring some North Korean agents or people, remote workers out of North Korea unintentionally? Apparently, the whole crypto industry had been doing that. So here's a beautiful little report on yeah, I guess we all did it. Some of them found it out or discovered sooner rather than later in terms of really crappy code. But there's some real funny stories in here of yeah, we kind of noticed because it would be different people at the beginning of the day versus the end of the day. And they only committed code at the same exact time every single day. But this just continues to be a thing. I don't want to do scare tactics, but this is kind of funny that it just keeps coming up, and very specifically in the crypto industry. And yes, absolutely, they found code committed that was tied to leaks.
It's not even that though, is the other thing. The bigger thing here that this has been kind of dragging to light. It's something I had chatted about with a couple of friends in some of the cybersecurity community. It's not just North Korea necessarily. This is a people and a social engineering attack at the end of the day. It is easier sometimes, especially in a remote world where remote hiring is happening with remote paperwork and copies of paperwork and things like that. It is easier to beat the hiring system sometimes than it is to beat the technical controls on an environment at times, because it's a people system. Hiring systems, for the most part, tend to be people-based, right? Or a lot of the different components of it. Sure, there's background checks and things like that, right? But you can buy identities on the darknet for 50 cents.
Right. I mean, so there was an interesting thread with Robert Mensching, who was on the show months and months ago talking about open source things. But we were talking. The reason he was there, in part, was talking about that was triggered by the whole long play of somebody committing code to a very popular open source repo, and literally almost becoming the maintainer of said repo. And it's this huge long play of having to like submit code and do all of those things. And he posited when he saw this, he's like, oh, holy shit, why would you bother? Like, why, what a long play. Screw that. Just go get hired by somebody. Like they're literally, why try and, to your point, Jordan, why try and hack somebody when you can literally just get invited and actually paid?
And people will give you the keys, right? Yeah, like people will give you the keys, right? This is the biggest thing that a lot of times that people don't think about when it comes to stuff like social engineering. There's some really great stuff that's starting to come out that's starting to become more and more public for it, right? Great in quotation marks, right?
Yeah.
Like people think that hacking is all of the like sitting at the computer, like so like social engineering is way easier. Like people will give
wearing
you
sweaters,
right? Exactly. Like, trust me, I'm a car salesman, or trust me, it's fine. Just give me. I'll be more than happy to help you with that, right? There is so much more mileage on things like that, on beating systems that everybody has to do for a massive amount of regulatory reasons. Well, we have to do this. Okay. Well, I can pretty much guess what your hiring process is going to be. That means I need to trick 2 people versus trick 10 years worth of technologies, right?
Right.
Which one's going to be easier almost every time?
Yeah. We meat bags are always the problem.
Mm-hmm.
Moving along. So maybe having our entire internet infrastructure here in the U.S. Have baked in government backdoors was a terrible idea. Here's I have the Wall Street Journal was the original kind of organization to talk about this, but it's paywalled. So I have a EEF link here, where they're of course taking their take, which I tend to agree with. Which is like, yeah, if there's backdoors, it's not only quote unquote the good guys who are going to have access to these things. So to be clear, the backdoors that the U.S. government has into our internet backbones was hacksorted by Salt Typhoon, which I believe is tied, well, we generally believe is tied to China. So for some period of time, we believe China had access to literally everything. At least Verizon and AT&T and a couple other major providers in that space that I don't know all the names of, but that's super fun. If you use any D-Link stuff at home, there was some really, really bad RCEs, remotely, what does that RCE stand for again, Jordan? Remote
code execution?
There you go, remote code execution. So if you were using a Cover X1870 or DIR X4860 or DIR X5460, go ahead and look to your left if you're working from home. If you see one of those, you should absolutely go and update the firmware because these things tend
this is going to be an interesting, and this is an interesting development with all of the remote work stuff in general.
Yeah.
Right. It's just like, because it's so hard because people are like, oh, well, we use VPN. Okay, well, sure. And that's great. But if I still have entire copies of traffic all of the time for it, right, at the router layer, like,
right.
And so there's going to be some interesting questions. There's always been this hot debate between like, well, how far down the rabbit hole do we go of providing home workers with physical equipment to help like run their internet or things like that? And what do IT departments have to do for that? It's going to be interesting because I would suspect that as we see more and more of these things and more of those physical types of attacks go off, like at some point, somebody's going to try to enforce something.
What I hear you saying is you're super happy that I'm running a WGRT, whatever, with custom firmware. That's
sure.
Yeah.
Where did you get that custom firmware is the real question.
Dude, it was a wiki from somewhere like 10 years ago. It let me do amazing things.
WikiLeaks?
No, but close. And the criticality here is kind of through the roof, 9.8, right? So like, again, this is serious. If you're using D-Link stuff, I would go ahead and double check that and make sure that you're not vulnerable. Don't have one of those things. Cups being the common Unix printing system. Cups has a long history of not being particularly secure. I think all of us in one voice can say, yes, printing is a mistake, was always a mistake, and we should have never done it. Putting paper through a machine and applying ink was probably the dumbest thing mankind has done, next and only to the internet itself. But here we are. It has another vulnerability. This one is super fun. Basically, it's not actually cups, but it's the discovery system for printers. And so Linux has this, many flavors of Linux includes not just cups, but cups.browser, And Captcha kind of like Bonjour on Apple, and I don't know what the equivalent is in Microsoft, but it's looking for printers on your environment or on your network, I should say. And if it finds them, it tries to automatically connect to them to make your life easier. Well, apparently they found out that that will reply to any IP. So as long as you send
You mean looking arbitrarily at ports on the internet for other things that are to your left and right in an unknown network is a bad idea?
But crucially, they will then call back to you. Like this is it, right? So yeah, I mean, okay, the idea that you can, use Telnet or like to reach out to something on a particular IP, but like this will then, but you do that, and then you can tell it, and then talk back to me this specific way. And if you tell it I'm a printer, it'll be like, oh great, and it does not care where that printer is, does not care. And so, okay, what does that mean? Well, you can then use a CUPS filter or CUPS filter rule, which allows you basically to write arbitrary code. And I believe it's PHP, but I could be wrong on that. So like, to be clear, any rando can reach out. If they can reach out to this port, that printer will talk back to it and say, well, what do you want me to do? And then you can literally just give it code to execute when a print job is ran. Because you're going to tell it, here's what you do to run specific if you have a print job ran. So that's super awful. Again, this isn't a Windows thing, but if you're running any Linux servers or workstations in particular, many distros include CUPS and CUPS browser by default. And the default configuration is to accept that kind of request from any device. Now, you would say, okay, but most of my devices aren't freely available on the internet. If you read this article, this gentleman will convince you otherwise, that there are hundreds of thousands of them on the internet, happily willing to fall prey to this attack. And they're already seeing it being used to amplify DDoS attacks, because what better way to DDoS by taking over hundreds of thousands or millions of printers around the world and have them spew out garbage to your adversary. Malware Tech, who is Marcus Hutchinson, actually released a little scanner here. So if you want to go to see, you can run this in your environment, and it'll try and look for those vulnerable devices and give you a list of, yep, we can find these devices, and you should go and shut that shit down right now. Moving along, Ivanti, I'm not going to go over these. Ivanti has not had a great month. Wouldn't happen to people I love more. If you use pretty much any Ivanti product, I'd highly recommend you go check out the links we have here. I'm not going to go through them in deep detail. If you're using their endpoint management software, workspace control, or cloud service appliance, or their scroll, nope, can't read it. I think one of their virtual traffic manager. Using any of those products, you should go take a look at those things, because they are have some very concerning vulnerabilities that are remotely executable. This is a super fun one. In our industry, we often think of air gapping as, that is the absolute pinnacle of securing a particular environment. Right, we do. Like, the most secure things we have are air gapped. And here's just a really fun story of like nation state actors going through and they're usually like, there's nothing super crazy here. I've seen crazy suggestions of like using sound, a sound of processors and shit to get data out. This isn't that. This is simply, hey, if somebody puts a USB key in this environment and then puts it in this environment, we can maybe do some fun things. So it's not like this isn't really to scare you and be like, oh, we should change our security, but it's just, you kind of literally want to read a real world like fantasy spy novel. That's basically what this blog is. Nation state actors going after actual embassies.
I do have a fun story about that happening once.
Okay,
actually,
well, go on, sir.
A company that I used to work for, a very similar type of attack, where they actually, what it was they identified the factory, they identified the type of technology that was in the factory. The only way to update said technology for what lived inside of the factory was by bringing it in on a physical media that had to go through a scanning and had to go through a whole bunch of other things, and then go through a metal detector and through a man trap for it. they targeted the person who made the deliveries to these factories because it was the same person who made them to it. And they uploaded not live malware to the USB stick for it, basically, was what they did, was they figured out a way to get non-live versions of it that when the disk became live at a certain state and point in time, basically, that it then became a piece of live viable malware for it, so it wouldn't get caught on scanners. And it made its way in, and it was caused a very, very large issue in a very large manufacturing facility back about 10 years ago. Yeah, it's totally a thing. It's
yeah. So again, if you're being targeted by, I always kind of say, like, if you're targeted by nation state actors, it's kind of game over. They're probably going to win. So I wasn't bringing it up to freak anybody out here. It's just a really, to me, it's kind of a fun story to read. Moving along, if anyone has been following Kaspersky or uses their antivirus products, just be aware that the U.S. I take no opinion on this, but the U.S. basically has effectively kicked them out. The federal government has made it clear that they will not buy or use their products. And so Kaspersky has been exiting the US. They kind of fired the whole team, I think, here in the US. But what might catch some people by surprise, or did catch people by surprise, is that what they have been doing is just automatically replacing their antivirus product with Ultra AV. And according to them, they've told their customers this, but man, there's a lot of consternation of, wait, sorry, what? All of a sudden I woke up one morning and as an administrator, without making any changes, all of a sudden there's a whole new AV product in my environment. That seems suboptimal. Right, so just be aware if you're using any of Kaspersky's AV. And if you are, I presume you're already kind of have some plan for, or have come to terms with how the US is treating that company. Moving along, this is less security, but it's interesting nonetheless. If you use WordPress, either professionally or for your own personal pursuits, there's a whole brouhaha going over in there. WP Engine, which is not affiliated with WordPress directly, and is a major provider or hosting provider of WordPress. They're just kind of in a bitch fight, and they're arguing about who owns trademark and yada yada yada. But it's kind of getting ugly. I don't think anybody really wins in this. But if you're using WordPress in any way, professionally or personally, this is probably, well, I should say, especially professionally. If you're hosting any WordPress sites, you might want to pay attention to this because it's kind of getting ugly, and there's lawsuits already filed and involved, and it's all sort of unfortunate. Super unfortunate and kind of crazy. The Internet Archive, if you've tried to reach the Wayback Machine recently in the last couple of days, it is down. It did get breached. And yesterday when I went there, it showed up a little, it had been defaced with a little JavaScript that said, hey, all of your info is going to be on Have I Been Pwned, which Troy Hunt has confirmed that is true. He has the data, and I think it actually is there live now. So some jerk faces decided to go after the Internet Archive, and now they're just straight DDoSing them. I'm not going to give them the light of day by posting their, the group actually came out on Twitter or X, taking responsibility for it. And in their words, it is because of Palestine in the US. But the security community is rightfully not pleased, and they are taking a ton of crap. And it's going to be interesting. It's an interesting play to go after the Internet Archive, which is neither US government funded, and generally just beloved. Like if you ever wanted to know, if you ever wanted to stop disinformation in the world, the Internet Archive is probably one of the best, the best places to do so, as this is exactly what it's.
What'll be interesting to see as this kind of develops, and this was something I was kind of thinking about the other day, right, is the Internet Archive, by its very nature, to a degree, is, already public, largely, like, by its intent and design. So it'll be interesting to see, like, in terms of, the breach info, as that kind of gets shoveled through Have I Been Pwned and, like, everything else, like, what does it actually mean for revealing info for 30, like, what exactly is being revealed in terms of what was archived on a largely publicly available site? So it'll be interesting to see how that kind of develops over time.
So one of the, I think this blog or maybe another one that I read, like, kind of specifically called out the data that was leaked out. So it's email addresses, screen names, last time you changed your password, and specifically the encrypted hashed password. So it's like, it's one of those things where, again, I don't know, was the encryption good enough? Will people be able to run, now that they have that, will they be able to crack your data? Or maybe with the right hashes, correlate that to other hacks, right? So it's just, you're right. You probably weren't giving the Internet Archive your credit card information or your social security number. Like, it's not the worst breach in the world. It seems like an odd one to go. It seems like an odd target, but these guys don't seem too bright in that way. Moving on, so let's talk about some news for Windows itself. In a recent Canary build, they talked about this administrator protection, and you can read what it says here. And it's a little, with one paragraph, it's a little vague what they're talking about. Our very own Rudy Ooms has gone through and written a kind of deep dive into what it is. I'll give you sort of my 2-sentence summary of those. If you think of UAC, user acceptance control, generally, if you're an administrator and you log in and UAC is enabled, what UAC does will create 2 permanent tokens. One will be a normal low rights user token, and the other one will be an admin elevated token. And both those tokens exist in your session kind of at the same time. And UAC is there to prompt you when you are going to use that admin token. That means there's been historically a bunch of UAC bypasses where, hey, the token's there and we can use it. And that's what this administrative protection is intended to address. So there's not 2 tokens, there's only ever one. Even if you're a local administrator, you're not running as a local administrator. And what administrator protection will do is when you say, just like UAC, something says, hey, I need to be elevated, it will go and create a whole other admin session in a protected area of the OS. And it'll do that on the fly just for that one process, or whatever it triggers. And then when it's dead, it will close that session down. So it's not just this permanent session sitting there that that threat actors could try and access without you knowing. So it's very much like UAC. It feels a lot like UAC to the user. And in fact, if you look at Rudy's here, he shows screenshots of what it looks like, and it's like, yeah, that almost looks and feels like UAC.
Something that's been in Linux for forever too.
Does it though? A
little bit.
But we've had run as administrator. My initial tag for this was, hey, Windows finally gets sudo or su. But it's like, but wait a minute, we've had run as administrator. We've had that forever. So and you can, I think there's a command line for elevating to admin as well. So we've kind of had that. This is different in that I guess maybe the true summary here is it's a more secure implementation of UAC.
Yeah.
And that's good. That's a good thing. Important. So this is a fun one. So Microsoft wanted to roll out updating the OS during the out-of-box experience, including auto patch. Now, again, this is, I think, unassailably a good thing. We should be delivering, when we deliver an operating system to a user, that operating system should be fully patched,
ideally.
Like that. Yeah, that doesn't seem like something you would argue with, but administrators, as we are wont to do, want to control that. There might be scenarios where, yes, that does absolutely increase the time it takes to image a box, and some people were very, very unhappy about it. So literally published on September 16th, 4 days later, they come in and say, yeah, we're gonna hold that off. We're not going to roll that out quite yet. They are going to roll this out eventually, but it should have some level of administrative control. And this is kind of frustrating because I can tell you from behind the scenes, this is something that the product team was told by MVPs and other orgs that are in the Microsoft CCP program. They knew this, they were told this. This is something that Microsoft sometimes does, where I think it kind of knows. There's people that kind of know this is going to take flack and it's not going to go well, but we're going to do it anyways. And then, yeah, it doesn't go well, and that's enough to get them to pull it back. it's kind of like an FA/FO situation of like, well, we'll just do it and we'll see what the
On
feedback.
the bright side, they did roll it back.
But that's
I mean,
my point, right?
there's a plus,
Like,
yeah.
right. Like that's exactly what I'm saying, Jacob. Like I'm sure that I had this feeling that there's some people within Microsoft that knew we're going to roll this back because we're going to do this and people are going to get angry about it. But they can't convince some upper management to do the right thing. And so, which is to delay this until we have the right controls on it. So like, well, we'll just ship it, right? Like literally just we'll ship it and then we'll
There's
see
no
if people
history
get
of that
angry.
ever happening ever.
What's that?
There's no history of that happening ever.
Well, it's funny you say that. So I take this as that. Again, it's a good thing, right? I think we should all agree. This is a thing we should be able to do. It's something people have wanted to do. So it's a net good, but they released it without the controls that I think many of us would also agree we need.
I think I see my favorite tab next.
Exactly, right? Which is funny because that brings us to the next thing, recall. So recall is back, but not. So recall, as if you are unfamiliar, recall is a highly touted feature of the new Copilot AI machines that Microsoft is rolling. What's that?
And fantastic concept initially.
Well, there's debate on that. There's debate on that too. It is, internet browsing history on steroids. It will literally take screenshots continually and then process those screenshots with AI to extract data out of it, so that later, if you were thinking, oh, what did I type, 2 hours ago, or what was I doing? You could like query in natural language, and it will literally show you screenshots and data struck out. All sorts of privacy concerns about this, and you would think they would have just got it right at the beginning by encrypting all that data. No, they did not, sir. It was literally plain text in a database that any local user had access to.
Any local admin.
No, I think it was any user on the box could get to it.
Well, it's both. He's saying both. So I would have unencrypted access to my own data as a local user, but I wouldn't have access to anybody else on the machine. But a local admin would have access to every user's data on the machine. So that's an and, not an or scenario. And again, as this did not go well for Microsoft, they tried to defend it for like a hot second, and then they stopped and they pulled it. And it's back. And it's back with what I would say is what it should have been in the very beginning.
Yes.
As system administrators, let's all rejoice. This is by default not enabled. So
for now.
Well, I can only, sure, but like you will not get recall unless, as a system administrator, you actively go and enable it. This is good. This is what we want. This is what we want for all features, like out-of-box experience software updates, right? We want the feature, but we want it off by default, and we want the controls to enable it. And you can read this now. They're also doing meaningful encryption, including saving the keys in the TPM, which is
and it's going into Enclave too.
Right, and all of the processing is happening in the VBS Enclave. Like it is as secure, I think, as they can make it. And it's all, again, going back to the last thing, it's just such an unforced error on their end. The whole big point, at least in my take, of Windows 11, like why Windows 11 exists versus Windows 10, is that they wanted to make hardware changes. I'm sure there's other reasons, but Windows 11 allowed them to up the hardware requirements. The big one including a TPM. That's why some of you on this call don't have Windows 11 fully rolled out yet. Again, there's other reasons, but one of the reasons is you have hardware that doesn't support it. It certainly didn't do 3 years ago. So like the idea that however many years we're into Windows 11, they come out with this new feature that is insecure and doesn't make use of the TPM when it's literally a feature crying out to use those things is practically a crime. But they came back, they listened, and they've, in my opinion, fixed it. Whether you still like recall or not, like that's on you. I cast newest versions. To me, it's interesting. I'll probably play with it, but at least I think it is at least approachable now.
I think it's an approachable conversation. I think the big thing about it, and I'm curious, I know that they've set it up so that users can turn it on. I'll be curious to see like organizational policies as those start to roll out for it. And I'll be curious what kind of legal precedent we get for it in the security space. I
Yeah,
think it's a much easier argument to have now when it is local encrypted data that's tied to the specific user for it. Whereas emails, aren't. They're in exchange. You can go grab them. You can get them, right?
right.
So it's going to be very interesting to see like what precedents start to get set, and I think that is going to be a big piece of the stage, especially for things like politicians and stuff like that. Going forward, it'll be interesting.
Yeah, totally. Okay, moving along. Windows 11 24H2 hit GA. I forget what exact day, October 1st, it looks like, we believe Harjit, and sometimes we do. We talked last month, I believe, about some of the features that were coming to this, so I'm not going to dive into this deeply. The big things I will call out is there is an LTSC release. So if you have I think last month we were talking about some big vulnerabilities that came out for the 2017 or 2016 version of LTSC. So if you're running some LTSC and there are absolute use cases for it, be aware that that 24H2, sorry, 24H2 Windows 11 is a LTSC release, and you can download that and begin your migrations there. There's no enablement package, so if you were hoping to do the little checkbox thing and magically everyone gets to 24H2, there is no enablement package for this. It is going to be a full FU or in-place upgrade, IPU. You can upgrade from Windows 10, so there's all supported versions of Windows 10 can update directly to 24H2 without anything in between. One thing to be aware of, though, is direct access is borked. So if you are using Microsoft Direct Access, which is, I believe, the predecessor to always-on VPN, that is apparently not working. Richard Hicks, who's sort of my personal spirit guide on these things, has confirmed that on Twitter/X, that yes, it is a known issue and that Microsoft is working on a fix. I think I heard somebody mention in the chat that maybe an update broke it, but I didn't quite catch that there was an actual KB. But definitely 24H2 Windows 11 breaks direct access, and maybe always VPN. I don't think we have the deets on that to know for sure. I'm going to skip over this. Here's the page and link for the CVE for Config Manager and the Management Point Security Update. Again, it was released on September 4th, then pulled the very next day, re-released on the 18th, and I haven't heard any large outcry. And here's the actual deets about the CVE itself, which last time we talked about this at our last meeting last month, we kind of knew this was available, but we had no info about what the actual problem was. Let's talk about Intune for a hot second. Not a lot here for me. I mean, to be fair, I have a somewhat biased view on the things that interest me in Intune, so I'm just giving you what I think are the highlights. You have working time settings for app protection policies, which means apparently you can literally just tell apps not to work at particular times of the day. This seems like the most European thing I've ever heard. So if you don't want people sending email like Jordan after hours, you can literally set times when he just can't open those apps. Again, I feel like this is coming out of the EU, because I believe there's even some laws about such things.
Yeah,
could be making that up, but
it's interesting. I wonder if that'll ever make its way to Windows. It'll be kind of interesting.
Yeah, right.
And it's interesting because I know this is a secondary step of it, because there was just a notification block where you wouldn't get notifications for it.
Okay.
Outside of those time blocks. And I have a feeling that some of this also probably has to do, I am 100% certain it has to do with the EU in part, but also with Germany in particular. So Germany in particular has extreme labor laws around apps and utilization of it, and time-bound nature of what happens if that happens, and like companies get fined like large amounts of money. Yeah, extremely good, extremely active. I don't know what I said, but yeah, they're very in-depth labor laws.
Okay. The other thing I'll highlight is that there was an update for the enterprise app catalog, so EAM, part of the Intune suite. You can now manually update apps. So you'll get notified. You can go look for the list of apps that have available updates, and you can manually go deploy those updates. Take that for what you will. So moving on, we're going to talk now about two brief things. This thing I want to highlight just because this is a blog by one of my friends and somebody I've co-spoke with and I respect highly. There was a whole Twitter rage thread about config manager versus Intune. I don't really want to have that debate right now. But as has been asked umpteen times, well, what's the gaps? What does config manager have that Intune does not? And so here, somebody I respect went through and kind of elucidated why he's still on co-management and believes he'll be on co-management for as long as he can sort of foresee, which is in IT generally the next 5 years. Anyone selling you a timeline beyond 5 years is basically lying to you. And he lists, to me, it's a great list of things that config manager still has that we lack in Intune. So if you ever need that resource for, how do I say this? I know that many of you have probably heard or been in conversations where some Microsoft partner or somebody who makes their money by selling subscriptions has tell you config manager dead and you should only ever use Intune. Even recently at Workplace Ninja, Microsoft really came out as saying the time is to go cloud native. We're ready on all of those things. So Microsoft has made it super clear that they are pivoting from, hey, there's a better together message and you should use the right thing for you, to now I really think everyone should be using Intune and there's basically no reason you should not be using Intune. So if you find yourself in those conversations, here's a nice little blog article. It's like, yeah, here's all the things that we won't be able to do, at least not yet. So we're going to kind of end on this. As you may or may not have heard, Windows Server Update Services has been deprecated.
What is dead can never die.
What is dead can never die. Yes, that's exactly it. This set off an absolute shitstorm of concern, both on Twitter and even here at Patch My PC. We had customers rightfully being concerned because yes, our product, there's a part of our product, I should say, that can make use of WSUS, or what does that mean? What does that mean for config manager? And so let's kind of walk through what they actually sort of said here. What they said is that it's deprecated. Now, you have to always kind of parse Microsoft really, really carefully when they talk, especially when they talk about their plans for their products.
The future?
I'm trying to also be careful with my words, right? So if you think about almost a year ago, or actually it was this year, right? They talked about SCUP and they said, well, SCUP is end of support. They didn't actually say it was end of life. That's kind of funny. They didn't, because like Microsoft will use those terms, right? You can go look up, and I do this frequently. You can look up Windows 10 end of life, and there's a whole page that says like, here's the end of life dates. Like it's right there. They're very explicit about when these things end of life, and that's great. Like if Microsoft's going to kill a product and they are no longer going to support it, and they absolutely do not want you using it, then they will tell you there's an end of life. But here they didn't do that. They very specifically said, well, we're deprecating it. And what does that mean? And they really call out specifically, it means we are no longer investing in new capabilities, nor are we accepting new feature requests for WSUS. Now, if you didn't laugh on the second half of that sentence, you are as dead inside as I am. The idea that they were accepting new feature requests for WSUS, I mean, that is absolutely freaking laughable. And so what this announcement means, and it really means nothing more than that, which is they are no longer going to add new features to WSUS. That is the start and the end of what this announcement means. There will be no more features for WSUS. Now, that's like saying nothing. That's as good as saying, like, we already knew that. That's not really surprising. And then you might say, well, okay, but I'm concerned. What does it mean for things like config manager? Well, they very specifically call that out. WSUS deprecation does not impact existing capabilities or support for Microsoft Configuration Manager. Okay, but are they going to remove it at some point? Well, no. Deprecated features continue to work and are fully supported until they are officially removed, and we have no current plans of removing WSUS from in-market versions of Windows Server, including the upcoming Windows Server 2025. So the WSUS, the reason that WSUS hasn't really been updated in forever is because it was first a product and then it got consumed by the Windows Server team, and they just simply didn't care. I mean, it's that simple. It's the large OS group, This is yet but one feature of the OS, and they simply did not care about it. And so it was left to sort of die on the vine.
Well, it works.
Right. Well, that's it. It works. It does what it was designed to do, and it has worked for years. But that also means it's in the OS, and it's not. I've yet to see, and you guys maybe can call me out here as being wrong, but I don't really remember Microsoft ever arbitrarily removing a server OS feature outside of its expected end of life. And what I mean by that is, I believe WSUS, at the very least, since it's being released in Windows Server 2025, means it has a 10-year support statement as part of that Windows Server OS release. Also, the open secret is there's a bunch of three-letter agencies here in the US that depend on these technologies, and they have sort of it's an open secret that they have an agreement that Microsoft will give them at least a decade to move off said systems if they're ever going to die. And again, this isn't that announcement. This is just an announcement that they're going to deprecate it. So if you have coworkers, or if you yourself, or you have your boss, he's going to go to Ignite and he's going to get told that WSUS is dead and come back and be all shades of concerned and we got to throw this out. All of that is, I think, FUD. Like I actually know Nir who wrote this, and I don't know that I don't want to cast or project this upon him, but like this is Microsoft intentionally sowing some fear, uncertainty, and doubt to make you make motions that they can't actually. They don't want to end of life WSUS, because that would be an absolute. We'd go back to the previous things we've talked about with recall and UV updates. Like that would be one of those scenarios where no, actually the large orgs in this world would come and say, "That's cute, you're not doing that." Like no way in hell. So they can't do that. But what they can do is say, "But it's deprecated," and get you concerned because they want you. I mean, again, what do they want you to do? Like again, they just make this really, really clear. While the WSUS role remains available, we recommend organizations transition to cloud tools, including Windows Auto Patch, which require you to have Windows E3 or A3 or better licenses for Intune, or for Azure Update Manager for server update management. Unless it's an Azure VM, you are paying $5 a month for. So why would they say this? Well, because they want you to move to their cloud solutions. That seems quite obvious to me. And they're happy to, calling it deprecated is a beautiful way of not actually killing it, but getting people to think that they will kill it. And again, we have seen this. They have succeeded in this. I've seen it on Twitter/X. We've seen it here at Patch My PC with customers reaching out. So to that end, if you don't want to send somebody to an hour-long webinar, I wrote this up a more tongue-in-cheek and more on the nose, like here's what I think. Everything I just said is kind of encapsulated in this blog post. If you're a customer and you want something slightly less bombastic than me, we took our finest, Ben Whitmore, and he wrote an actual KBE that goes really down to this by line, and what we here at Patch My PC plan to do about it. Okay, with that is my soapbox. I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing. If you've made it this far, as always, thank you. Thank you for hanging out there. We're going to stay around and take Q&A. As long as people are interested, you can come off on mute. I think you have to raise your hand and let you, but if you need to go, we don't take that personally at all. Thanks for coming. We'll see you next time.
I'm going to break out the puppy for quick Q&A though.
Okay. What's the puppy?
An actual puppy.
No, I mean actually the puppy, because he's squeaking at me. He would like to join and talk about Windows updates and Wolf B. He says, "Hello, I would like to Wolf B."
So I'm gonna raise your hands and we will try and get you off mute. But I'm gonna answer one question live here. So Michael Gorn asked about Azure Arc. So he has installed Azure Arc on his on-prem servers to remove Config Manager. How does Patch My PC? Yes, so that will work. We don't have an official support statement on it, and there's some internal reasons for that. I'm acting like it's actively. My current day job is to figure Azure Update Manager for Patch My PC. It will work, but it's going to. Just one second, Jake. Like it works because Azure Update Manager doesn't care where the update, what the source of truth for update. So in order for it to work, you have to point it to WSUS, and because our product Patch My PC can update, can deploy updates directly to WSUS in standalone. So it's not through Config Manager. It's not going to work through Config Manager. But if you use Patch My PC, deploy updates to WSUS and approve updates in WSUS, and use Azure and configure your servers to point at WSUS, then Azure Update Manager will work just fine. Now, I realize that's not super
Ideal.
satisfying.
Because it doesn't, just because you install
Yeah.
WSUS doesn't make it like magically make those patches available in the cloud. Your servers
Yeah.
all still need direct line of sight to that
Right.
box to get the updates.
Right. And there's no way to extend Azure Update Manager. Like, again, Azure Update Manager, I'm actually, if you're going to be in, I have a whole session on Azure Update Manager in 2 weeks at MMS Flamingo. But Azure Update Manager is kind of a next iteration of Azure Automation Update Management or something. But the point is that it is a light wrapper of automation around the Windows Update agent, right? So it's not like Config Manager and WSUS, where it's, Config Manager is really controlling the Windows Update agent configurations to point it at WSUS. You have multiple software update points. It'll try and make sure it goes to the right, all of those things, right? AEON doesn't do any of that. It just, you, however you want to, however you want to point, wherever you want to point that device to get its updates, Azure Update Manager will happily automate those things, automate the process of kicking off those installs when you tell it to, using a filter. So it's really, I don't want to say it's just some scripting, because that seems like it's underselling it, but it is some light automation written around the Windows Update agent. It's not a source of truth like WSUS and Config Manager.
So this is an interesting question that's here. I don't know if you said it, but what if you have a server with no internet access and you try to make it secure? How would you get updates if you don't want to use WSUS as Microsoft wants you to go to the cloud?
You don't.
You don't. So this is an interesting thing that I have an action item here to write a follow-up article on this. We have this concept that we run into a lot of the time of like this conversation around the difference between air-gapped and what air-gapped actually means, between air-gapped versus network hardened. WSUS does not magically mean like we're air-gapped. At some point, right? Like you're air-gapped-ish. At some point, somebody is bringing content down to some WSUS server somewhere in some way, shape, or form on the internet with access to the internet. And even if they then extract that content and then walk into a server room with the things on a CD and then re-import it to some other WSUS server that's not on the internet, that content at the end of the day had to have access to the internet somewhere. So there's always going to be some server with access to the internet for it. The other thing for that, like if you want a server that's truly, truly offline, that has no access to the internet, and I mean true no access to the internet, what do updates matter?
Submarine. It's the submarine. It's the submarine case.
Yeah, but then, well, no, it's not even the submarine case necessarily, right? Because submarines might still have access to the internet, right? In some scenarios, or they might at some point have time where machines connect to the internet or connect to other things, right? Why, if you have something that is truly never, ever connects to anything else, it does not talk to anything else. It's not allowed to talk to anything else. Or update, how big of a concern and factor then at that point then are updates at that point? They're still a thing, right? Yeah, but like,
but the thing there, Jordan, is
nobody's bringing anything in, right?
But
there's different.
I would say you're saying the internet, and that's true. But as we just saw, like in this one, like, okay, nothing is truly. You could have I'm going to say something here, and you can challenge me on it. You could truly air gap a network, hard air gap, no network connectivity ever, but there's no environment that is truly disconnected.
Well, and that's the thing, right? Like that's the thing that I'm saying, right? Like if you that's the caveat. If you make something that is truly disconnected, that once
you were never able to install anything. If it was truly disconnected, you were never able to install anything in the first place.
Ever again, correct.
You could because
there's
you
no
could never
USB stick, there's no nothing, right?
Right.
Truly disconnected, right? Then yeah, it's fine. Then what does it matter, right? At that point,
yeah.
Right? Like doesn't matter. It works perfectly all the time. Nothing in it ever changes. It's totally sealed. It's hermetically sealed black box environment, right?
So I feel your argument, but I don't think. I think your argument. I want to make clear, like your argument is like those environments don't really exist because even the air gap, from the network,
correct,
means somebody's going to
something
have
at
to,
some point has to get something from the internet and then sneak it in. At which point it's not air gap.
Well, what
or
I would
it
say
is
is,
ish, right?
what I would say is like you have an air gap network because you're running something in it, a service,
Yep.
whatever that service is.
Yep.
And that service itself is going to get updates, which means you need some way to bridge the air gap thing. So that's why updates do matter.
Yep.
And those are real scenarios. And absolutely, where you have a network, a true network air gap, there is no solution other than WSUS. In fact, yeah.
Well,
Today,
and even then, you're still getting them from the internet from some other WSUS server.
That's true, but
sneaker nets. Yes.
I mean, okay, I guess I shouldn't say that there are. I mean, you're right. You're getting it from the internet. There are some solutions, I think, that use the offline cab, but I mean, it's the same.
Where do you get the offline cab from?
No, I get it. Well, you get it offline. It's right there in the name, George.
Microsoft sends you a
get it
floppy disk.
off-
I mean,
There's the line over here. Okay, that's the internet, and you get it off the line over here, George.
Oh, okay. I got you.
yeah,
I got
yeah,
you.
it's-
Right? Yeah. Yeah.
Holy, and I thought you were smart. Like, yeah, the point is you're going to have to, I mean, that whole USB key strip thing we talked about as like nations, like everyone had, like every truly disconnected scenario, truly air gap scenario has that scenario, which is like, okay, at some point somebody is getting data in or out
across that boundary.
You're going to
somebody has to walk that data across the boundary in some way, shape, or form. That probably came from the internet.
And so if you want to care about the updates of those machines, which we're on board, you should.
You should care about that.
True. WSUS is the only game in town for doing that in any kind of enterprise management kind of way. There are some other solutions that are basically one-off machine things. So if you can take the offline cab, put it on a USB stick, and you can walk to each device and plug it in. But the idea that
download the files direct from Microsoft Update too, if you really wanted to.
Yeah, that's true.
Website.
Yeah,
you could totally do that.
Yeah. But the idea that any cloud, like a cloud solution inherently today, is not, it cannot go against.
Yeah, it can't do that. Like, there is no solution for that.
Right, it's not a solution. Nope. So, okay, I think we beat that to that horse to death. Somebody, Aaron Osmer asks, did Windows Update for Business and Autopatch merge? Seems in Intune they smashed the two interfaces together this week. They sure did. They absolutely did. And I think there's, I'm not sharing, but I think there's even a good blog on it. But what I can tell you a little bit of what happened there is that the Autopatch team Autopatch came out of Microsoft Managed Desktop, and that team became Microsoft Managed Desktop. If you don't remember, was Microsoft's big enterprise MSP play. You would pay them a monthly fee, and they would manage devices, and they would manage the OS and physical hardware life, from cradle to grave for you. That, as a business model, did not work out for them. What came out of that then was Autopatch, but sat in this different part of the organization. It wasn't part of Intune. It wasn't part of Windows servicing. They had just built a MSP solution on top of those technologies. And what happened was the Windows Update for Business team, upon which Autopatch was built, and the Autopatch team became one team. And that team's not under Intune. They're under, I believe, Windows servicing. So they're kind of where they should be made, arguably in the org. But what's a little weird is that they have taken full control of Intune's patching UI, which is very true. So I've said this before on this channel, like Intune has no patching technology. And what I mean by that is the Intune organization, the product team that is Intune, nobody is working, like none of those people actually work on the technologies used to patch. They work on the control. They work with the APIs and the OS controls that the Windows servicing team gives them, but they themselves don't any of those technologies. And that still remains true. But so the Autopatch organization, or group of people, that product group, and the product group that was in Windows Update for Business, which is an OS feature, and also the Windows Update for Business deployment service, they are now all one happy org. They're not under Intune, but they also control the Intune thing. So that the Intune UI. So that is, yes, absolutely. Everybody on this call who's using Intune, I am promised in the next week or two, it should be fully rolled out across the globe, that the Autopatch and Windows Update for Business UI should be merged, which is to say there should only be one UI for Intune patching, and it is now the auto patch UI. Now you might have some questions about, well, there's some licensing that seems, you might have some licensing concerns because there's some deltas between Windows Update for Business, Windows Update for Business Deployment Service, and auto patch. And I don't want to go into them deeply other than to say whatever you had before, whatever functionality you had before, you still have now. Whatever functionality you didn't have before, you do not have now, even though it's called auto patch. So don't, I can appreciate the concern, but don't freak out about, oh, wait a minute, did I lose functionality because now it's auto patch and I didn't have auto patch because I did blah, blah, blah. No, all the current functionality is still there. It's just an org and branding thing.
Olaf says it's time to go outside.
He looks
Okay.
more tired than anything with the yawn.
All right. Okay. I think we're going to call it then. Thanks again for spending, wasting another perfectly good hour with us. Anyone who's at going to be at MMS in Florida, hey,
We'll see you
reach
then.
out, say hi. Unfortunately, we were kind of hoping, like half a year ago, we're like, oh, we can do one of these from there. It's like, yeah, I know. That's not how date math works. So we'll see you there. Say hi, and otherwise, we'll see you next month. Thanks for joining.
See ya.
Bye.
Yeah, and you know, I've written some UI, so I know what terrible UI is like. It's usually my
Anything
own.
you've
But
written.
That's
I
what I'm
was gonna
saying.
say,
That's
Like
the
that's a
joke.
pretty